Guys, it's Mathel here once again, and today I've got some, well, CoCSpray. That's right, CoCSpray. Cast on Crit bows is one of the last frontiers of cast on Crit that I have yet to tackle. And that's just because I haven't really enjoyed Barrage in the past, and I feel like it's going to be the weakest cast on Crit out of all of them, based on the fact that it's just really hard to get spell damage, your bow itself won't ever have spell damage, and all kinds of other bullshit. But I did think it was about time to give some bow cast on crit a shot, just because some of the ascendancies rather appealed to me. Spark's looking pretty good, and EK is also a pretty good spell in this setup. So the build revolves around getting shit loads of projectile speed for your EK and Spark, and also using a freezing pulse as some heavy single target. Using a Quill Rain, we have super fast attack speed but rather low crit, so we use the Critical Strikes gem to counteract that, as well as a Diamond Flask. Using 100% Pierce with a Drill Neck, you get quite a lot of projectile damage. So that's the goal of the build, to actually scale projectile damage and use projectiles, as you can't really scale area or spell damage too easily on a bow side of the tree spec. So we're kind of pigeonholed into using our projectile spells. And the ones we've chosen is Spark and EK, primarily, as well as Freeze Pulse. And the reason I don't have Arctic Breath or Fireball or some other stuff is because I'm not using GMP with my Barrage. If I was using GMP, then perhaps I would also be using something like Arctic Breath or Fireball. But currently the links are just Cast on Crit and Barrage with Critical Strikes to enable our actual consistency. So then after using Spark and EK, I'm left with one other choice, and that seems to be Freeze Pulse, because it gives some pretty good single target and some nice freeze potential. Now the character itself is still probably one of my weaker overall cast on crits played, even though it actually, for the most part, has the fastest clear speed of any of them I've ever made. Cast on Crit Spectral Throw also had pretty fast clear speed, but this one is kind of on another level, and that's mostly due to Spark just going bananas most of the time. So up until level 88 or so, I was averaging 300 million XP an hour, just doing any maps, and I was running several other things like Porjoys, which would give me 800 million an hour from level 75 onwards. So there is certainly clear speed potential in this build. It's just a little bit weaker on single target than some other builds, and a bit squishy. Even though I have 40% dodge, 45% evasion, 46% spell dodge, some good life leech, it's just the fact that you have to stand still with your Barrage, and the life pool isn't that high. The alternative is to run a Combs chest, but then we're losing a good chunk of resists and also evasion. It is probably the right call, I just haven't made that decision yet. So this is just a nice, pretty casual Itziri run. At this stage I'm level 89, I think, and Itziri runs aren't any problem at all. The gear itself, though, is actually surprisingly cheap. Besides my Quill Rain, which is now 6 link, and that's not entirely necessary. If you were using a 5 link, you just wouldn't use Freeze Pulse. Besides the Quill Rain, I really haven't spent shit all on this character. There's nothing impressive about it. Shadows and Dusts are great for their rampage, but they're cheap these days as well. A Rat's Nest, just your standard sort of cast on crit gear. There's really nothing special. Not even using any Aerion Jewelry because I'm sustaining mana through 2 mana gained on hit Jewel. So this is what I was talking about when I was running a Porjoys back at level 79 or 78, I believe. One of my first Porjoy runs, and throughout this actual run I've sped it up twice here just to get a quick feel for how the XP bar moves throughout the next 5 minutes. The run took about 4 or 5 minutes in total, and it gave me an entire level, which averaged out to be about 850 million XP, and it seems to be a really, really good build for running something like Porjoys, because there's a lot of close walls, you shatter everything, you kill everything really quickly, and yeah, in general it's just I don't know, it seems to be one of the much better builds I've had at running Porjos. You die pretty quickly if you take any damage because everything in here hits super hard, but you never give it the chance to. So this is double speed at the moment, but the playstyle of the character is actually rather fast and addictive even, because the Barrage shoots out so fast at this rate with the Quill Rain, and the sparks fly all over the place, cleaning up the entire screen. I have made some examples here and there throughout streaming of the power of just the 4-link with only the spark involved. The spark itself can clear all by itself, with the EK, once you get a 5th link, doing quite a substantial amount of extra single target damage. So really I'm saying only a 5-link is super necessary, a 6-link is just gravy if you can get one. One other thing I'll mention before I go into the breakdown of this character is it is actually the laggiest build I have played to date. Now that includes cast and crit spectral throw, also known as PowerPoint. This is basically a more PowerPointy version than PowerPoint. Thanks to the sparks and the pierce rate and freeze pulses, I suppose. I don't know, I've just been hitting lower FPS amounts than ever before, and that's on my pretty nice computer. And here I show you the XP per hour, pretty dope. So here is the level 91 Scion Will Eat Cock for crits, and it is currently spec'd into both Berserker and Deadeye. That is the choice I've made for this character, but there are other ones, and the most popular form of cast on crit Quill Rain, as far as I'm aware, is to be an assassin at the moment. That is because Quill Rain has a really low base crit chance, only 5%, so adding extra base crit per power charge and getting 5 or 6 of them ups the crit chance quite substantially, and also goes towards giving extra crit for your spells. The problem I had with this is, besides just getting some power charge on crit, on a non-crit, and the base crit, you got nothing else really. So this is completely useless, and this isn't very good either. So all you're really doing is upping that base crit. And when you do that, you still will need to run a life leech gem in your 6-link setup, so that would essentially replace my critical strikes gem. You'd still have a 6-link, and you'd use a life leech instead of a crit strikes gem, which replaces my berserker node essentially. But then you also get Deadeye on top of that for a Scion, and that gives me 50% extra proj pierce, proj speed, a bit more proj damage, and an additional projectile on all of my projectiles, which includes Spark, Freeze Pulse, and EK, as well as Barrage as well. So I figured that was a more well-rounded choice to have a slightly less amount of leech, slightly less amount of crit, but have Deadeye and a couple of free passives. So that paired with piercing shots and, well, not really the drill neck, but paired with the drill neck gives you a much larger amount of projectile damage. So I do have a 100% chance to pierce, and I am scaling all projectile damage throughout the tree. All this projectile shit here, some over there, and mostly just crit. So crit and projectile damage is what we're going for. Now the other quiver I was using prior to drill neck was this one, and it's actually just a bit less damage, but a very solid choice because it'll give you much more life, a much better crit chance for your barrage and spells, and also some projectile speed. Something like this runs you 20 to 30 chaos right now, as it's not a terribly popular choice, and it was my quiver all the way up until about level 90, at which point I put on drill neck just to get that extra DPS. So as you can see here, 5.3k average on EK. Put on the other one and it's 4.6. So drill neck is something like a 15% damage boost if you have a 100% pierce chance, but it's less utility as there's no crit and less life and projectile speed. So it is kind of a choice you make, but recently I've been sticking to drill neck. So that's what the build is based around: Barrage, a drill neck, pierce chance, and projectiles. And lastly, we're using 2 volley fire duels. So I have 1 and 2, and that means I'm forced to get this shitty 10 dex node and this shitty 10 dex node, but they're pretty crucial in the setup because we're not using any GMP with our barrage, as it's just 3 link to crit strikes and cast on crit. And without our volley fires, this is what the barrage will look like. So it's not bad, but the volley fires really do change the way you crit and the way you play it. It basically turns into an AoE spell, or skill, that will hit a lot more targets and fire out more arrows for those procs. So I do recommend at least 2 volley fires. I think any more is overkill, and 2 is the right number. 1 by itself doesn't feel that great, 2 feels pretty good though. Besides that, we do get some actual projectile speed throughout the tree, and in total our spark, for example, has 188 projectile speed, which is a lot. It goes up to about 230 if you have a good quiver. So projectile speed is the basis of the build, and so is critting hard and somewhat fast. Currently sitting at, let's have a look at this, 89% hit, with our golem up 90% hit, and 55 crit. So the diamond flask fills out the rest of the crit as well as 3 power charges, and it actually ends up being really consistent crit as you've seen from the video so far. Besides that, I'm running Herald of Ice, Herald of Thunder, that applies to your spells and gives you extra damage, and also is my Curse on Hit setup for Assassin Mark, which is how we get our power charges. Lastly, I'm running Purity of Elements to reserve my mana, and that gives me an overcapping for ally weakness maps, because when you run higher level maps you run into ally weakness quite often on map rolls. But besides the Quill Rain and the Drill Nerk, everything else is pretty stock standard. You got your Shadows and Dust, which you could use instead as face breakers, would give you more damage, but the added speed you get from the Rampage here is actually quite useful for this build. A couple of rings with some resists, and if you can get accuracy, that's awesome too. You will need int somewhere, bear in mind, and I've chosen to get it on my rings. Just a nice evasion chest with a rather healthy amount of life and resists. A rat's nest, leather belt, life resists, some series steps, which are somewhat important because we don't have Vulpact, so my method for dealing with Reflect is essentially to get phase acro and a series step, meaning my overall defense tab is 48 evasion, 40 dodge, 46 spell dodge, and capped resist, as well as having its series promise for leech, a instant life flask, and the berserker node for leech as well. That makes Reflect somewhat safe, but you do have to change around a few things on certain Reflect maps or certain mods of maps. Besides that, I have a bunch of accuracy and crit multi on my neck with some life. That's a really nice neck for the build. And a Stibnite flask. Now leveling this build is the same as just about every other cast on crit build. Get to 38, get your cast on crit on, run a tabular, run a few of the leveling uniques, some Elrond jewelry, and go to town. I do a video on that which I will link down below. And as far as the progression of the build leveling goes, you basically just go down here, grab this, grab your King of the Hill, straight over here, and then just make your way down to Shadow to get the rest of the crit, because that's where you're going to need for early usage. What do the jewels look like that I actually use? Crit multi for spells, proj damage, life. 1 2 mana gained on hit jewel. That is how you sustain your 11 cost barrage. As you can see, when you're not hitting anything, you do run out of mana. Blood Rage to sustain frenzy charges. I believe I took an extra frenzy from Merciless, so I have 6 in total, and that's a nice chunk of damage scaling as well. That's probably all I'm going to say about the build. That's pretty much all you need to know, I would think. It's been a very fun build. It's been very fast, and I may tackle the last sort of cast on crit frontier that I've yet to do, and that is wand barraging. Cast on crit wands. This I will have to dub CoCSpray because I'm an immature child. Hope you guys give it a shot if it's right up your alley. I'll see you guys next time.